Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Pat Flynn Show. Once again, here, ready to disrupt, dismantle, and destroy the phallocentric, heteronormative, patriarchal hegemony is Dr. Jim Madden, and we're going to talk about Platonism today. We've been promising this. We've been promising that we're going to do some sort of focused philosophy episodes. We're going to explore different thinkers, different schools of thought. And already Jim has completely bailed. I guess he wasn't sure of the topic, and we just frightened him off. Don't worry, he's having a few connection issues. He will be back here presently. There he is. I thought that you were too intimidated by the topic that you just were like, I'm out of here.
No, I got bounced as soon as you said I was here to bust the phallocentric paradigm, right? And so, no,
hey, I'm not getting involved in this business.
No.
Well, we'll save that for another episode. Today we're gonna get
chunky riff on the bumper music today. I assume that's you.
That's a Pat Flynn riff. Yeah, you like that one?
Mm-hmm. Like that. Yeah, thank you for that. That was good.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thank you, gentle listeners. Thanks for tuning in for this new series we're starting. We were going to call it Focus Friday because we were going to focus on a philosophical school of thought every Friday. Then I'm like, sometimes we do stuff not on Fridays, so
that's right.
It will just be what it is. We're going to talk about Platonism. And we welcome your questions. We welcome your comments and feedback. We are live streaming here. And before we dive in, before we start getting real friendly with the forums, not too friendly.
Too friendly.
Yeah. What's up? How's your week been?
Good. I just got freaky with some Turkish get-ups this morning. All right. So happy with that.
Yeah. And real freaky.
Yeah. And had a really, really good night on the mat on Monday night, jiu-jitsu wise. Maybe a little too frisky for grandpa, so there's been some recovery. Right. Yeah. But I knew because my daughter has a swim meet tonight, so that means I won't be training jiu-jitsu tonight. So I knew there's gonna be an extra day off in there, so I went for broke on Monday. So
nice.
Yeah, happy with that. And just reading and writing and getting away with that. So happy about that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Where are you at on the current book project?
The proofreader has it. A friend of mine is proofreading. I also know that she's just coming off a vacation to Florida with a number of small children. So I think she needs to be granted a recovery week. So as soon as that thing's proofread, I'll send it off to hands greater than mine, and we'll see what they do with it. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. So Jim, you know this, but for the gentle listeners, I do have a little document that we will share here sporadically throughout on the screen, but it's a little clunky, so I don't want to keep it up the whole time. I will link it, of course, in the show notes. So I had a few opening remarks to get this conversation going, but I wanted to know if Jim had any pre-opening remarks before we dive into this about Platonism in general, or what people should keep in the back of their mind as we introduce this topic and explore its details.
Yeah, I think a really important thing to keep in the back of your mind on this is a distinction between Platonism as it's been handed down to us and Plato. Okay. Yeah. All right. When you get into Plato's dialogues, there's a lot. It's a lot spookier in there than the popular report of it. Okay. And exactly what are and are not Plato's views, and how settled he is in those views. And when you get into, dialogues like the Parmenides, which are relatively late, we think, in the writing, where he seems to be aware of all of the classic criticism of Platonism, and he's like, yeah, I know this is a problem. And then there's all that sorts of stuff that certain schools of interpretation like to bring up, that, in his letters, he seems to say, I don't talk about the real stuff in the published writings, right? Because, he had
it's too spicy.
It's too spicy. Yeah. And I think a lot of times what we're dealing with Plato is a caricature of Plato and not the real thing. And I think something very similar should be said about Aristotle too. Okay. I think we've domesticated these guys in a lot of ways. And there's a line that, really changed a lot of my philosophical orientation, or it's caused me to go on a half decade reread of stuff now. There's a line in where Heidegger says there is no efficient cause in Aristotle. There's no such thing. Okay. And what he means, he's not saying there isn't a moving cause in Aristotle, but he says when you really pay attention to what's going on there, whatever we think of Heidegger's particular reading of what a moving cause is for Aristotle, it's really clear what just using this one example, what Aristotle's doing with the four causes is he is not trying to answer the same sorts of questions that we're trying to answer today. Right.
That's certainly true.
Yeah. And then to think that we're going to sort of map that onto something contemporary, I think is always a worry. Okay. So for me, in like what is or isn't Platonism, or I like to think what isn't Plato, if we can know that. And there is this interpretive hermeneutical problem that's always in the background, right? To what degree are we pigeonholing them into the particular intellectual problems that we're facing today, rather than sort of letting them set the agenda for us?
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Real quick, let's give a shout out. Against Fascist commented, anyone who doesn't want to watch Pat Flynn talk about Platonism is not invited to my birthday party.
That's right.
Got to have standard. And Jim Madden, of course.
Yeah, of course. And let's face, there will not be fascists at that birthday party. So no, right. Nice.
All right.
Thank you, anti-fascist. Yeah.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. Guys, we'll jam on your questions and comments as we move along once we get started here, but we want to build a little bit of momentum first. If something pops in your head, drop it in the comment box. I just want to the way I'm going to start out this conversation, and this isn't going to be definitive by any means. I thought that this would be a useful launch point for Jim and I to just have a conversation, because my thoughts on Plato and Platonism are ever evolving. Like I've just had this within the past year, I had this like pretty big paradigm shift on Plato's even epistemology, which maybe we'll get into. And Jim, we're talking about that, but I just want to give a shout out here to, I think a very good book. I'll hold it up in front of the camera if I can figure out which way is right. Aristotle and Other Platonists by Lloyd Gerson, really important book. And you know, he's engaged in this general project of reconciliation. Like, is Aristotle a Platonist? Is kind of what he's and he's arguing in the affirmative there. Once you kind of understand what big tent Platonism, the kind of Platonic philosophy we're going to talk about today, and he gives 7 points in this book of what he thinks Platonism is, and we'll explore those 7 points and we'll comment on them, and we'll get Jim's feedback. Of course, I'll have some annoying remarks of my own as usual. And but before we do that, let me bring the document up, and we won't keep this on the screen too long. But there was a lecture given recently by a Dominican and a philosopher, Father James Brent, who was summarizing Gerson's position, and he was trying to explain like kind of what Platonism is, or big tent Platonism, and he does it by giving a sort of series of negative definitions. So I'm not sure if people can see this very well. I'll read it out, but I'll also try and zoom in. Did that just get bigger, Jim?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, sweet.
You mean the graphic?
Yeah, just the graphic. Just right. So let me
family show. I'm sorry.
Let me throw this out there, and we'll just get some. This will be the launch pad for a conversation. So I will also link afterwards this lecture. I thought it was a really good lecture, very, very provocative, very interesting, and I would encourage people to go check that out independently. But what Father James does in summarizing Gerson's work is he says, look, if you kind of want to understand Platonism, at least a starting point, or so he argues, is to see how it's kind of not what so much of modern secular atheistic philosophy is. So he's like, if you want to understand Platonism, kind of see what we're working with now in terms of so many modern assumptions, both on the academic and popular level, and then start to kind of strike all those away, and you'll have an idea of what Platonism is. So what would be some of these modern assumptions? Well, whatever else Platonism is, it's going to be anti-materialist, right? It's also going to be anti-mechanist. It's going to be anti-nominalist. It's going to be anti-relativist. It's going to be anti-skepticism. And then he gives these kind of like quick definitions of what the Platonists would say about all these things. So in relation to materialism, the Platonists would say it is false that the things that exist are just bodies and their properties, that it's just shapes and motions or something like that, right? With regard to a mechanistic philosophy, the Platonists would generally say it is false that the explanations available to a materialist worldview are adequate, that they give the full story. It doesn't mean that they don't give part of the story or even a significant chunk of the story, but they're not fully explanatorily adequate. And that's where we'll talk maybe more about the four causes. It's not nominalist, meaning it is false that the only things that exist are just individuals, each uniquely situated in space and time. In other words, the forms are real, and we can get real friendly with the forms, right? If they're of age. Things have natures, things have essences. The Platonists will say we're not relativists, either epistemologically or ethically. So it is false that the truth is what appears to just me or my group, and it is false that what is good for me is just what is good full stop is just what is good for me or my group, right? So the Platonist is going to resist terms like, well, that's your truth, man, right? They're going to be like, yeah, probably not. And the Platonist is also going to not be a skeptic in the sort of more aggressive sense, right? They're not going to say that knowledge is impossible. Might be difficult, right? But not impossible. So in short, and then I'm going to let Jim hop in here. The Platonist, according to Father Brent, who's summarizing Gerson, would say this: there is a true philosophy. There is a true philosophy, and it's the perennial philosophy, and that's what Platonism is. And what this philosophy says is essentially this: you can know the truth about things. You can become a good person. Top-down explanations are there. It's not just all bottom-up. And the many are often explained in terms of the simple, right? You could be friends with the forms. And perhaps it is just a comprehensive anti-physicalism, reductionism, or naturalism. There's the launch point for a conversation, Jim. What are your initial thoughts on all this?
Yeah. Lots of things to say here. So,
let's get this out of the way. There we go.
So the first thing I really like about that listing is that all of the positions are stated negatively. Okay. And just in terms of Plato, not Platonism, right? And I think this might be a way for us to explain the difference between Plato and Aristotle too. Okay.
Let's do it.
First of all, I want to be very clear. If Lloyd Gerson says I'm wrong about an interpretation of Plato or Aristotle, he's right. Okay. So
simple as that.
Simple as that. Yeah. I mean, like he's a serious scholar of the Greeks. Okay. And he's reading in the Greek. And so, I'm going to have some things to say here, but in no way am I going to say, I'm going to get in the weeds and like contest Lloyd Gerson's reading of Plato and Aristotle. Okay. I need a footnote there. One scholarly footnote. So I like the negative statement in terms of Plato. Okay. Because, when you read the dialogues, it's very hard to get Socrates in the dialogues to commit to a conclusion, especially the first five, right? It's always, we're trying to get to this place. 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 And we never quite get there. Right. And, keep in mind, Plato goes out of his way to have Socrates bring up again and again and again throughout the writings that we're trying to recollect something we once knew. Okay. But recollection is clearly not this thing that's within our control. Right. And it seems like what you get mostly from the Socrates of the dialogues is this denial of certain going views, certain views that were on offer, certain views that were on offer. Okay, so I like that it's all stated negatively. And it may or may not have been Father Brent's intention to do it that, but I like that. Okay,
right.
All right. Now, but I think there's a trap in putting it this way. Okay, and it's not a trap that's like Father Brent's problem or Lloyd Gerson's problem. It's a trap for us, we moderns. Okay,
right.
Because when we say when we say Plato's position is anti-materialist, okay, we automatically fill in. Well, then it must be positively dualist in the sense that we would mean it.
Right.
Okay. When we say it's anti-skepticism, right, then we think we're going to fill in. It must be positively realist in the sense that we would mean it today. Right. It's for all those points. Okay. And I'm sometimes troubled that we say we want to follow a Plato or an Aristotle and reject modern assumptions, but then we take our modern agenda and use that to set the agenda on how we read Plato and Aristotle, and not rejecting the whole damn thing and going back and asking, okay, so what would it be like to get ourselves into this world that these Greeks are in and think that way? Okay. Right. And I'll give you one example. It seems to me pretty clear that when, I guess, like just using Aristotle in this case, and I think we can find the same things in Plato. When Aristotle says something's material, he means it's subject to change. Okay, and so the material world is the world of mobile beings that are subject to change. They're in motion. Of course, motion for the Greeks means much more than just moving through space, changing position. It means any change. Okay.
Yes.
Think of it like Plato's contrast between the material and the immaterial, the visible and the invisible realms, is between those things that change and those things that are not subject to change. Okay. That's not exactly, I think, what modern, especially analytic philosophers mean by physical versus non-physical.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And I think this lead and this is confessional. Okay. My first book in philosophy of mind, I was not sensitive enough to this. Okay. And I think this is why we ultimately, I'll have to deliver on this now, but this is how we always end up turning Plato and Aristotle into Cartesian dualists when they're not.
I was going to say, that's the trap you're trying to help us avoid, is like, we see these anti things and we'd be like, must be Descartes.
Must be Descartes.
It's got to be a substance dualism then, right? Yeah.
But we don't want to say that. So it's Plato. Okay.
Right.
And every time I hear someone say, Plato and, dualists, like Descartes and Plato, I'm like, no, not at all. Not at all. Okay. Because those are very different things. Okay. However, Plato and, so Leibniz, cites Plato's Phaedo all over the Discourse on Metaphysics, or quite a bit. And I think he's giving a really flat-footed, self-serving reading of that. But that's like, I think we're all like, we've got a hangover from this, the way Descartes and Leibniz, these guys read the Greeks. Okay. So I think that's very important. I think everything that on that list is true of Plato and Aristotle. Okay. But I want to be careful. Don't define the anti with a pro. Okay. That's drawn from the very dichotomy that we should be trying to avoid in the first place.
Yeah. So what you're saying, I'll try and summarize it, is these anti descriptions, if you want to call it that, do not entitle us to assume that just because Platonism can be posed in contrast to a sort of modern secular atheistic worldview, that we can then go help ourselves to the assumption that it must be a Cartesian picture of the world, right? Because then we haven't even fully understood the anti-definitions, right? Because the Cartesian picture of the world, okay, maybe, right, it still falls into some of these categories in a way more so than Platonism would.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's like, okay, maybe you've got like the ghost in the machine thing that kind of escapes it. But otherwise, it's and look, I'm a big fan of Descartes. We will do an episode on Descartes at some point. I disagree with him, so I'm not just like poo-pooing the guy.
I also think Descartes is not a Cartesian in the same sense that Plato is not a Platonist.
Yeah. All right, we'll have to close and bracket some of those off for.
We'll let that go for now.
Yeah, and it's kind of like with Aquinas too, when he talks about material. Like this is something I had to get clear on too when I was studying philosophy of mind. Is again, because we have so many of these Cartesian assumptions, we just do.
Yeah.
That like, when Aquinas says that something is material, like immaterial, all he means is that it's not material.
Yeah.
And like that, and like that's it, right? Yeah. Not that there's some other like spooky, invisible thing, right? It's just
yeah. We still today, we think, okay, so you've got these physical properties that are these spatio-temporal properties, probably ultimately, okay, maybe qualitative too, depending how we want to shake that out, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got these other non-physical properties, and they're kind of ishy, whatever, But there's like two separate kinds of properties, and I'm a bearer of physical properties, I'm a bearer of non-physical properties, and we have to like locate all these things, okay? And that's sort of now, whether we like it or not, that's our background assumption. Like, we're trained to think that way from the first day we walk into a philosophy classroom, okay? And that is not how Plato and Aristotle are trained to think of things.
Yes.
They don't, and so, I think inevitably we kind of turn these people into Cartesian dualists because whether we want to admit it or not, we are default Cartesian dualists. Okay, we occupy, we occupy a technological culture built on Cartesian dualism, on a mechanical approach to nature. And I think that doesn't somehow color us hermeneutically and how we're going to read these other people. And so the exercise of rejecting that mechanistic default position and to encounter nature in the way that the Greeks are encountering nature, that is a very heavy hermeneutical psychological exercise off. And have any of us even pull it off? I think that's a dark but interesting question. Right?
It is super dark and edgy.
And it's the kind of question I like, I lie awake at night in bed worrying about.
Yeah. By the way, guys, if you're enjoying this, do us a favor, like and leave your comments and subscribe and all that. We're just getting warmed up here. I want to say how true that is and how true it was for me, because it's not that we just have to remove ourselves from these mechanistic nominalistic, relativistic assumption.
Yeah.
We do have to do that. But then there's another layer, which is the Cartesian layer, right? That we also, and I say have to remove ourselves from, because look, the cart's out of the horse. Like, I'm something of a Platonist. Like, I think this is true. So I think you should remove yourselves from these, from this sort of cobweb or piecemeal modern philosophy, right? Of these various different assumptions and commitments that are in conflict or contradiction with themselves or other commitments. It really is, I think, just certainly not a systematic, but ultimately, I think, untenable way of approaching and encountering reality. But to your point, it's like, it's not just that we have to remove that layer. There's then this other layer that a lot of us are just also totally unaware of, which is this Cartesian layer. Yeah, that somehow that's in there as well. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know if you want to say anything more.
And also, so I think there's a very, very fascinating cultural situation. This is just, how we live and move and have our being in the world now is under these mechanistic, seeing the world as grist for our technological mill. Okay. We are kind of all default, Hobbesians or, followers of Bacon or Descartes, all these people, right? But also, it has a lot to do with how I think a lot of us were trained in graduate school. Okay, so, and I love the people that trained me in graduate school. I want to be very clear on that. Right? But basically, if you're going to work, if you're in a more or less analytic program, and I'm sure there's the analog going on in continental programs. I want to work on, just using Plato as an example. Okay, well then what you're going to have to do there is you're going to have to show how Plato has bearing on some contemporary problem in metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So, the whole point is the dissertation is going to ultimately have to try to show how some nugget in Plato is productive, type of technological attitude, right? Is productive of research, for a contemporary going problem, which means you're going to have to show how Plato can play by the rules as we find them today, not how we can play by Plato's rules. Even though our surface story might be, I'm going to show how we should all be playing by Plato's rules, but the agenda, the problems are set by the ones that are coming up now. So I really wonder to what degree a lot of us have ever really tried to get back into where these guys are starting.
Yeah, this is good. Hey, before we get to the positive things, like maybe we should just consider a few reasons why we shouldn't be nominalists or relativists or things like that. I was down giving a talk to some students the other day on ethics down in Milwaukee, and we talked about kind of essentialism and how critical that is for the ethical project, right? And we were asking, like, well, why believe that we can be friends with the forms, right? And that things have natures and essences. And I'd be curious, some of your motivations. One seems that at the end of the day, a lot of these positions, if you try to deny them, at least all the way through, become radically incoherent. Right? If we say that things really don't have a nature or a form, and that there's no teleology, like at some point, or if it's all a construct of the mind, right? Like everything is just a mental construct. At some point, we're going to have to ask that about the mind. Is the mind just a mental construct? That created itself? Like it just pulled itself up by its bootstraps, right? Like, so we'll have this sort of vicious circularity and self-defeat issue. And then it's like, okay, well, there has to be at least one essence, right? Or nature of the mind, of whatever that is. And then it's like, well, now it seems like there's no real good reason to deny what seems otherwise obvious, that things really do have this organizing principle of intelligibility and unity. And same thing with teleology. It's like, if things really aren't directed towards an effect or range of effects or ends, we can ask that about reason, right? And it really seems like reason is directed at truth, is perfected at truth. And if we deny that, then we deny that there's any sort of standard to adjudicate whether somebody is reasoning well or reasoning poorly. And if that's the case, then we have no standard for saying whether somebody gave a good or bad argument. And if that's the case, then you're never going to be able to give a good argument against teleology, for example, right? So it's like, just by trying to really, I think, deny these Platonic commitments all the way through, you eventually do get to a sort of self-defeat or incoherence issue. And once you kind of see, okay, that's not tenable, we have to at least allow this in somewhat. It's hard to see how you don't allow it in to the extent that just seems to comport with common sense and intuition. Not to say that everything is a substantial form, or that everything, like the state of Texas, whatever that is, it's probably a social construct. I'm happy to admit that, right? But at least some things, right, really do have essences and natures and aims and all that. So I just want to get your thoughts on that, of how you might try to shake somebody out of the nominalistic paradigm, right?
Well, I mean, let's just kind of stick with the theme, right? Platonism, or Plato, okay? And if you look at Plato's Phaedo, okay, how does he arrive at the notion that there are forms in the Phaedo? And it kind of pains me to say that there are forms, as if we're quantifying and predicating over them like we would any other individual, which I think once again is one of these like anachronistic problems. But why I think there are forms? Well, if you look at
real quick, can I hit pause? For people who are totally new to this, what do we even mean by that?
Yeah, about
forms.
Forms, yeah. Okay, so let me do this. Okay, so Plato in the Phaedo, and this will get to what you're up to.
Yep.
Is he takes an example that he's pretty sure everybody in the room will agree with him on in making a judgment. Okay, so he says, so you've got two equal sticks, and I always imagine, Socrates picks up two sticks; they're equal. Okay, okay, and he points out that, okay, fine, we're all going to make that judgment, and it seems that we're correct in making that judgment that these are equal, but he also says they're equal. They're as unequal as they are equal. Okay, and what he means, okay, maybe they're equal in length, but they're also unequal in, say, their location, or they're unequal in their value. I mean, so he's saying, even if you define them in terms of something we can really nail down, like they're equal in the length, and I could show it to you, there's also a sense in which they're unequal too. So whatever example I give you of their equality is only recognizable in the backdrop of a prior understanding of what equality is. Does that make sense? So if you ask me, okay, are these sticks equal? Yes, Socrates. They're and the students always agree to Socrates. Yes, they're equal. Right? And Socrates said, well, equal in virtue of what? Well, their length. Yeah, but they're also unequal in other respects. So for you to recognize, in his view, that in fact they're equal in any of this respect, it always assumes there's a background understanding of what equality is. Okay.
Right.
That's independent from any of its instantiations. Okay. So there's got to be this highest genus, this highest definition of what equality is. But no, it will be undefinable to us, right? Because it'll be like, it's that by which we define other things in terms of equality. And so it always has to be in the background. Okay. And this is why Plato, and he calls that the form. Okay. The form of equal. All right. And no, it's in the background always. That's why it has to be remembered. It can never be shown. It can never be directly present to me. It's always got to be, in a sense, recollected. It's got to be there in the background. Okay. So what are forms? Forms, for the way I read Plato, are the absolute background understandings that have to be in place for us to make any judgment whatsoever. Okay. And the fact that we do judge, and the fact that we can communicate our judging between each other, right, among ourselves, would seem to imply that, that these things have some sort of standing outside of us, right? They're not merely our whims. Okay. All right. Now, once again, though, let's be fair to Plato, because of all the caricatures, right? He's saying these are always in the background. Okay. And I can never show them to you. All right, I can never define them to you. Okay, but they are the absolute presuppositions of our making any kind of judgment at all. Right? And so he's basically saying that there's got to be something that grounds our judgment, that is not our doing, that is always unstated. Right? All right. And so call those the forms. Right?
Call those the forms. Yeah,
call those the forms. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Then do you want to circle back around to what I was saying before? Why should we be friendly to such things?
Well, because I mean, it's interesting. It's also a question too, like how friendly we can be to them for Plato, right? Because they're always in the background. They can only be recollected. Right? But friendly in this sense, to to deny, and I'll go less self-reference on this, right? And more just to deny them, just runs contrary to the obvious fact that we're making judgments, right? That we're making judgments that are grounded. Okay. You can say, yeah, but like these judgments are relative to humans or something like that. Sure, but we're making them. All right. And I expect other people to be on board with them. And even if, we've evolved down a certain path that like loads it for us to make certain judgments, we still make the judgments. Right?
Yes.
And they are clearly, even if we could be different kinds of organisms making different kinds of judgments, there's still judgments that are imposed on us by our encounter with the world in some sense, right? And so, and it's interesting, like Plato doesn't give you a big fancy self-referential argument. Although I think those are
no, he doesn't. Yeah, that comes later.
He just says, it's just sort of, hey, look, we make judgments. How else are you going to make sense of it? But that there are forms, right? That I like to pursue that way. But also, I think you're exactly right. The judgment that we don't make judgments is itself a judgment. And it would seem that there's got to be an ultimate background against which we make those.
Right. Yeah. Father James in the lecture kind of is, he gives a kind of a softer defense too. And he just wants to say in general defense of Platonism against these, these other lines of thought, the materialist, the nominalist, the relativist, we should take a posture that it is irrational to deny an otherwise deep and obvious intuition absent some very clear defeater of it, right? So it just seems obvious that child abuse is a horrible thing, right?
Burden proof is shifted.
Yeah, and if relativism and nihilism and mechanism like lead to me not being able to affirm that child abuse is a horrible thing, like, the burden of proof is on you, buddy. You got to bear that one out. Same thing. It just seems like we can't make sense of judgment apart from these commitments that you've talked about. It just seems like that in order to even get to these sort of, I would argue, incoherent philosophies, we're going to need all the sorts of things that the Platonist champions to even make the judgments that would lead us into these types of errors, right? Yeah. To begin with, right?
And now, what I just said, Kant would say too. Okay. Right. And I think in a lot of ways you can see Kant as Platonic in that sense. There's some absolute conditions of judgment. He calls them the categories too, just like Aristotle does, right? The categories, the concepts.
Yeah.
But then Kant doesn't. He's perfectly happy to say that these do not in any sense form a backdrop that humans encounter, right? It's a backdrop that humans impose. Okay. And then now this is where your self-reference argument comes in, because then along comes Friedrich Nietzsche and he says, yeah, Kant, you're right. Okay. This backdrop of forms, right? It's a useful fiction for human beings, which means now all bets are off, right? Our judgments are not objective. Okay. So there is a kind of default realism about this that's in Plato. Okay. That's not in the more modern Platonist sort of things like Kant, right? Where, Plato's, for Plato, it's just issue of, well, could it be that we're just sort of imposing this on the world? It doesn't come up for him, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So there is a kind of beginning realist departure that's baked into it. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And if you ask, well, why make that? Now Plato just doesn't seem to feel a need to defend the assumption, right? We today are no longer so innocent, right? And why make that assumption? Because otherwise you're going to have a self-referential paradox of the sort that Nietzsche will point out to you, that you have a self-referential paradox. Yeah. Right.
All right. How about we start, because again, this will just be a kind of introductory scratching the surface episode, a primer, if you will. Do you want to talk through some of these more positive points here?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So let's do it. I'm just gonna read these off real quickly. These are again found in Gerson's Aristotle and Other Platonists. So what I would like to do when we do these episodes is at least give a couple of resources. Obviously, go read Plato. I have the Essential Plato literally holding up my computer right now, so it's the right height. It's like the perfect thick book. So I would the Essential Plato is a must read. There we go. I would throw Gerson's book in there. Jim, if you were to recommend maybe another resource or two.
Oh man, on Plato specifically.
Think minimalist, right? Like 2 to 5 books just to get people what you think are the best.
What I would do is get CDC Reeves' translation of the Republic and read the introduction. And then, of
Sweet.
course, read the Republic. Yeah.
And then read it. Yeah. You have to do the primary text.
Yeah. I have an almost embarrassing man crush on CDC Reads right now. So
it's fine. We can admit that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, sweet. All right, let's go through these 7 general themes again, summarized by Gerson. So when he's saying, "Well, what is Platonism?" Well, it's going to include at least these commitments. It seems. 1, the universe has a systematic unity. 2, the systematic unity is an explanatory hierarchy. 3, the divine constitutes an irreducible explanatory category. 4, the psychological constitutes an irreducible explanatory category. Next, persons belong to the systematic hierarchy, and personal happiness consists in achieving a lost position within the hierarchy. Next, moral and aesthetic valuation follows hierarchy. And then finally, the epistemological order is included within the metaphysical order. I'll keep this up for just a few more minutes, and then we'll put our big ugly mugs back on the screen. Where do you want to? How do you want to start to parse through this, Jim?
All 7 of those, in my view, are entailments of the conclusion we reached by the argument for form. Right.
Yeah, spell that out for us.
Yeah. So if you, let's just go with the first one. The universe is systematic unity. If you say, if you arrive that judgments objective, and the judgments are objective, they're getting something right. So my judgment that the sticks are equal presupposes an ultimate broadest genus for judgment that is equality itself, the universal of equality, the form of equality. Okay, well then it would seem all those things that fall into that unity, right, are themselves part of a systematic unity, right? They can all be understood under the intelligibility of the equal now, right? And for Plato, the just and the good and the beautiful and all these things. Okay, so as soon as you admit that all the equals things are species of the ultimate genus, the equal, okay, it would then seem you now have a systematic ordering of things, right? And boom, second point, systematic unity it's hierarchical. Okay, we're going from least general to most general, and presumably, the things higher up that generalization are explained by fewer things, right? So we should be getting a more satisfactory explanation as we go higher up, right? Okay. The divine, now I'd have to go back and look at how Gerson defines the divine for Plato and Aristotle, but I would expect though that, the divine for Plato and Aristotle is really it's the immortal. It's that which is not subject to change. Okay. And so what is the divine ultimately for them? It's the forms. Okay. And, Aristotle will talk about the God, but the God, has this very, very intimate relationship to the forms. Right? Same with the psychological. What is the psychological? Well, it's that which makes rational judgment. And so it too then is something that is in a kind of conformity or uniformity to the forms. So once again, you see, so on and so forth, right? So we can go through all 7. I think you could see that they just follow from that. They flow
from
that basic, I think, just right there in the Phaedo, argument for forms. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And we have the, of course, the hierarchy of being. If I remember, I'll link to a lecture from David Oderberg. He gave a great lecture trying to say we need to bring this back, right? Yeah. This offers a lot of explanatory power here.
I'm going to be keynoting a conference with Oderberg in December, which I'm very excited about that. Yeah.
We're definitely going to have to do a review episode on that.
Yeah, we will.
That's going to be sweet.
Maybe we can get him to come on the show.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. He would be a fantastic guest. So real quick, the universe has a systematic unity. This is one of those things that we definitely still assume this today, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not. We don't think about it in the same way that Plato and Aristotle did, but this is a lasting legacy, at least of Platonism, right? Because we do assume,
as Nietzsche would tell you, if you he would say you're still just a damn theist if you think this, because he understood from the notion of form, the whole thing falls out. So if you're still going to say your science gets the systematic unity of the world right, Nietzsche would say you have not heard. You have not heard that God is dead, friend. Yeah.
Yeah. You haven't heard the news, which is fake news, by the way.
Yeah.
That's fake news. Yeah. But yeah, because what does this commit us to? It commits us to the idea that there is a systematic understanding to be had, that reality as a whole is intelligible, right? Yes. And certainly that's presupposed by sciences.
Yeah.
Right? We go looking for explanations, and generally we find them. And when we have difficulty find them, we don't throw our hands up and just say, well, we're not working with a systematic unity here. It could just be unintelligible or brute fact or just some random chaos. No, like we assume, no, let's work harder. Let's keep pushing, because we have this commitment, which I think is an absolutely right commitment, that there is a systematic unity and therefore a systematic intelligibility that can be gotten at. Right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, and this is why I think in many ways, for me, one of the best teachers of Plato is Nietzsche. Okay, because he understood what it would really mean to reject the Platonic project, right? And realized that most people who say they're rejecting it really are not rejecting it. Mm-hmm. Right. You'd have to give up on that first point, the systematic unity of the whole, right?
Yeah. And that's where Nietzsche is so useful. And you've got me thinking more about Nietzsche since he was actually kind of our first focus.
Our first philosophy one.
Yeah. We'll do another one on him because he's so fascinating. But you've changed my thinking on him as well. And he's so good for getting people to see these are the actual implications of this way of thinking.
Yeah.
And I'm going to help speed you along to the conclusions, right? Because you're kind of missing, like, you haven't got the news, friend.
You haven't
right? If you
you
still think this, you haven't got the news, right?
Like, what part of atheism didn't you understand, son?
Yeah. Why are you still cheery?
What do you really? And Nietzsche, I wish I should have the reference for you, but at one point he says, if you think there's grammar, then you're a theist. Right. If you think there's order at all, if there's order at all,
Which is why I like sort of those harder ball physicalists, right? Like Rosenberg and Dennett and those guys, because like they just seem to me and look, I understand that many naturalists disagree with them on many things. Like, believe me, I understand that. You don't have to say, well, naturalists disagree. I get it. I'm not as dumb as I look. Still pretty dumb, but not quite that dumb, right? But they seem to me to be wonderfully consistent, right, with certain starting points.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? And like Nietzsche was good with, like, he saw those commitments and he helped to expose them. And so, like, no, you guys, you aren't going deep enough yet. Like, I love that you haven't got the news. All right, what do we want to say about this second part, the explanatory hierarchy, especially when it comes to moral and aesthetic values? I think that's and the hierarchy of being. I think this is such a cool, and even when you do ethics, like I was talking to this ethics class, and I don't want to get too sidetracked, but the notion of value and human value, like how do we ground that, right? And I brought out that the hierarchy of being can do some work here, but it takes a lot of work to even introduce this idea to people in modern society. I think there's other ways of grounding. Well, part of me just wants to say, get rid of the term value altogether in ethics. I think I don't know your thoughts on this, Jim, but my mind is this seemed to be kind of imported from economics. It's very subjective. Like, let's just get back to talking about the good. Right.
Yeah. No. I mean, this is one of the many things I've learned from McIntyre. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like he clearly loathes the term value in ethics, and because he understands that this is basically a coinage. I mean, let me state it of Max Weber's. All right. Because Weber had come to realize, look, if the world is utterly disenchanted, okay, and we're dealing with just mechanism, then there only is technology. There isn't ethics anymore. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing for Weber to be rationally said about what the good is. Okay, there's only what we show up valuing. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. There's no nature to which we can compare what we're doing that could act as a norm. There's just these subjective commitments we show up in the world with, and all reason can do on Weber's view is just mediate how to get from A to B. Okay. Mm-hmm. This is Hume. I mean, and hell, it's Thrasymachus from Plato's Interlocutors, right? Or Socrates' Interlocutors. So that idea. So I don't use the word values in ethics at all.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I'll talk about goods, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll talk about the good, but I won't talk about value because you're exactly right. It loads it into economic theory and ultimately, I mean, Weberian sociology. And to be fair to Weber, I mean, Weber's not saying, "Ooh, this is great." He's really deeply worried about this. Yeah,
as he should be. Yeah.
read
that's
Nietzsche too, and he understood it.
there's something of an ethical suggestion for the forms as well. Like, if you think that there is a such thing as unjust discrimination among humans, take racism, right? And that humans ought to be treated equally, that they are of equal worth, or ontological goodness, let's say.
Yeah.
What grounds that? Like physically, we're all really different. Like, people are shorter, taller, smarter. They look different, right? So we're definitely not equal in any physical sense.
But wait, equal is said many ways. So there must be, for us to recognize it, there must be an ultimate background of equality that we understand and grasp and judge by.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so maybe there's something like a substantial form or an essence that we all share, right? And then we can say, like, well, okay, then if you're engaged in unjust discrimination, you're getting something about the facts of the matter wrong, right? About human nature or human. Like, it seems like if you're a legit racist, it'd be like because you're committing a fallacy of accident, right?
Yeah.
Legitimately, right? Rather than understanding what somebody is substantially, you've kind of considered only a contingent accident or an inseparable accident or something like that, right? Like, there's some like metaphysical messiness going on. But so I would say, like, yeah, there's ethical suggestion, again, deep commitments that we have no reason to deny, that we shouldn't deny, but we want to make sense of them metaphysically. Platonism can be very helpful there, right?
Yeah. And okay, and I'm gonna go to like a Plato as opposed to Platonism thing here. I think there's this really romantic thing in Plato that we miss quite a bit. Okay. So if you look, I know I'm a broken record in the Phaedo, but I had a really good encounter with
Phaedo, Credo, like these are two really important ones.
In the Phaedo, Plato has Socrates. And once again, there's all these questions, like, is maybe this actually is the historical Socrates in those early dialogues? Maybe not. Maybe. Okay. So I just don't, I'll let Lloyd Gerson sort that out for me. Okay. But Plato has Socrates say, when I was young, I studied, in the translation I always read, he calls it natural science. Okay. But if you're a little careful, because what the Greeks mean by natural science is not the same thing that we're talking about natural science, but I studied nature. And that didn't really satisfy the kinds of question I was asking. Okay. And then I went and I studied these other guys, these philosophers, and they never really answered it. Okay. And he says, then I studied this other guy, Anaxagoras, who was going to give an explanation of everything in terms of mind. Okay. And in the translation is usually capital M, mind. Okay. And we always have to be careful, not to turn that into some Cartesian mind. Okay. And it's news, it's understanding. They're going to explain the world and understanding. And the example Socrates gives in the text is, so, hey, I could have escaped from prison the other day before they executed me. And of course, if you gave an explanation of my bones and my sinews and my muscles, you gave this material explanation, that's all true. I wouldn't have stayed sitting in the prison if my body hadn't stayed positioned this sort of way. Mm-hmm. However, that doesn't satisfy. I stayed in prison because it was the good to stay in prison. Mm-hmm. Okay. He thinks there's another kind of explanation on offer here. Now it's important. Right. He sees it as completely consistent with that material explanation. They're not competing. They are not competing. But you don't really understand my behavior unless you bring this notion of the good involved.
Yeah, you're lacking some important aspect of intelligibility. And that's the way I think of the four causes, is we're trying to get all the intelligibility we can.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And now, interesting thing. Okay. And I think a lot of people miss this. Right. So Plato says, or he has Socrates say, I'm going to be careful. He has Socrates say, hey, I wanted this explanation in terms of mind, which sounds like what he means in terms of the good, an understanding of what is best. And none of the scientists could get it to me. Anaxagoras talked a big game about it, but at the end, it's just more, earth, air, fire, water combining. Okay. And he said, I, Socrates, and he calls it, have my own confused method for this. He calls it a confused and ill thought out method for this. And he says, so now if you ask me, why is the individual thing beautiful? I only say it because of the beautiful. Okay. I only, if you ask me why something is true, I only say it because of the true. It's why is it good? Because of the good. Now, and then, but keep in mind, he calls this confused. All right. And a few pages later, when one of the fellas says, hey, Socrates asks him, why is this square bigger than the other one? Because it participates in the double. Okay. He chides him. He says, you're just giving me a trivial answer there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Plato is aspiring to this. He's aspiring to know the good and the beautiful and the just, right? In order to explain what's going on at the first order level of his life.
Mm-hmm.
But he admits to go right from the beautiful and the good and the just and all that to the first order thing is confused and silly and trivial. Do you see my point?
I do.
Okay. And so this is, I think, just the beautiful thing in Socrates is he's going to his death with the hope, right? That he can finally put this all together. But he's not telling you you're going to put this together in this life.
Right. Yes.
He's not saying that. Yeah. And I think we make Plato sound like this facile moron. Well, he said it's beautiful by the beautiful, the individual beautiful thing is beautiful by the beautiful. Hey, freshman, isn't that funny? Ha ha ha. That's just silly. He called it confused, right?
Yeah. Don't you love the just sort of condescending, the chronological condescension that so many of these nitwit professors have, and taking shots at like these huge these huge system builders. Oh, so have I when I'm younger. Like I think I've had my ass whooped so many times at this point that I've finally been forced to be more humble about these things. But part of the reason I did it when I was younger is because the professors did it, right? Yeah. And then you go back and you reread them as an adult after you've really lived some life and had your ass whooped numerous times. You're like, oh, this guy isn't a moron after all.
Not so much, right?
He's actually a genius, right? Yeah. And he's a poetic genius and a beautiful genius. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so and think what do we hear throughout the Phaedo and throughout the previous dialogues is, I can't show you this. It can only be remembered. It would have to be recollected. It would have to be recollected. It would have to be, I can't show you this. And we go through the Phaedo now and we're like, the arguments, are they really very good? Are they, and we love to tee off on them, these arguments in the Phaedo, they're so bad because Plato was a moron and all this. If he claimed to prove something in the Phaedo about the forms, he's just contradicting himself. Because he said, all I can do is remind you. All I can do is remind you. And all our reminders fall short. All our reminders fall short. And one of the points, I think it was from Father James Brent's point, is that moral life is to recover the position in the hierarchy that we should have had. Mm-hmm. Okay. What's Plato doing? He's saying something's really gone wrong here. We are not where we should be.
Right.
We can't dig ourselves out of the hole. And we just have to keep trying to remind ourselves and remind ourselves and remind ourselves and remind ourselves with the hope that we'll hook it up again.
Right. And we have a question that we'll get to that I think this connects in an interesting way with the Christian story, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
There may have been a fall.
There may have been a fall, right? Awesome. Like, reason can take you a long way. Yeah. And then maybe on the far side of reason, there's something to be said in favor of revelation, right? So I've always found that deeply interesting when I was investigating Christianity to see that convergence and that correspondence in many interesting ways, right? Like, so now that's like a double-edged sword because some people will be like, well, look, Christianity is just stealing from these guys. The way I always saw it is like, no, it's like that's which is stupid, right? When you understand the historical context, right?
Yeah. And as if any ideas are ex nihilo.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's actually it's on the far side of reason, right? It's helping to connect certain dots that go beyond where reason can fully get us unaided, right? Mm-hmm.
And this is really, I think it's really important in a lot of ways because what was Socrates? He was basically executed for impiety. Okay, all right. And it's interesting how he appeals to piety at certain points in the early dialogues. But Plato takes you through Socrates' defense of his belief in the forms and afterlife and all this, and the arguments are sort of suspiciously not as good as you would think they would be. Okay, and then he kind of gets the youngsters in the room, on board, but hey, Socrates, we can't really get it. We can't see it. It just doesn't really grip us. So what's he do? He tells a myth. Okay. He tells the creation myth, right? He tells a myth about the afterlife. And it's kind of the standard myth of Athenian lore at that point. Okay. And what does he say at the end of the myth? It's really interesting. Socrates says, one would be a fool to insist on the truth of this myth. However, it's a fair risk to do so because it seems to be the only way to get us all the way to an understanding here. Okay, so now you have an interesting interplay now between reason and piety there.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah. Any summary thoughts here, Jim? And then we can maybe just take a couple questions as we wrap up.
Yeah. No, I mean, just beyond it, in my view, is just don't be afraid to return to these texts and let them speak to you. You not speak to them.
Yeah, good stuff. I have gentle listeners.
20 years to do it.
Yeah, and be patient with it. Return to it often. Advice I tried to take seriously and that I've come to appreciate. This was in relation to Aristotle's Ethics. I remember Mortimer J. Adler once gave a lecture. He's like, you have to read it at least 12 times.
Yeah, at least, man.
At least 12 times. And not all in the same year. That's important too.
No.
So, yes. If you enjoy this, gentle listeners, give us feedback. Again, like, share, comment. Let us know who or what school of thought you might like to see a future focused episode on. I know we definitely want to do Nietzsche. We definitely want to do Descartes. Somebody requested Hegel. Jim,
yeah, no, I want to do the great Hegel episode at some point here.
We're going to do the great Hegel episode. So it could be an individual thinker or a school of thought.
Pat and Jim's Hegel Throwdown 21.
And look, I've got my kind of superficial studied Hegel a little bit in the master's program. I am not. I don't have, and when you just have that, you're always very hesitant, right? Because because you just realize how inadequate that is when it comes to considering somebody so significant. So it'll be good for me to do Hegel. I'll mostly just be listening at that point. So we'll do the Hegel Throwdown, but let's take a few questions here.
Let's do it.
Okay, here's a good one. This comes from Andrew, and he wants to know, would Augustine be considered a Neoplatonist or just a Platonist? So maybe we should have made those distinctions a little more clear up front between like Plato, Platonism, Neoplatonism. I use the term Big Tent Platonism, which is kind of a catch-all, right? Which I'm borrowing from Father Brent there. But I don't know, maybe you can help us parse some of these categories.
My understanding has always been, and I could be historically, I could be wrong on this, is that Augustine is directly reading Plotinus, okay, who is the arch Neoplatonist, okay. So I would probably think of St. Augustine as a Neoplatonist, right? And, of course, there's all sorts of interesting questions to what degree is, Plotinus all that much different from Plato and all that, right?
Yeah, he would definitely fall under, I think, the Big Tent.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. As would Aquinas. Right. These guys are all in a general sense friendly to the forms. Right?
Exactly. And I think if you really want to get into some Augustine scholarship, I think you probably need to read Plotinus than you do Plato.
Right. Yeah. In the same sense that you should read Feuerbach if you want to better understand Marx.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's definitely a Big Tent Platonist in the way that. So just to be clear, like I'm in agreement with Brent in terms of like this perennial philosophy is quite expansive, right? We would put people like Plotinus, Augustine, Boethius, Aquinas. They're all Big Tent Platonists, right? Even if which they obviously do, differ on specific issues, right? Like issues of whether you take an extreme realism or a moderate realism or a scholastic realism or how they think about participation metaphysics or stuff like that. Like there's obviously, headbutting and disagreements, but in the general, they would all kind of meet these sort of anti-definitional requirements, right?
Yeah. And if Nietzsche's right, so does Richard Dawkins.
Yeah. Well, that's.
Yeah,
I just saw that poor old man just had his Humanist of the Year award revoked from him.
Did he really?
Yeah, he did. I guess he went against some ideology that you're not supposed to go against.
Wasn't sufficiently woke.
Right? Yeah, he wasn't sufficiently woke, so they took his prize from him. So he would always be welcome on this show. I don't know if he would ever accept it, but I'd be happy to chat with him.
I would love to talk to him about that episode. That would be interesting.
That would be sweet. Yeah. So, Professor Dawkins, if you're listening, drop me an email.
Do you do the kettlebells, Richard?
Yeah, happy to help anybody get started with that stuff. Dry apologist. Here's the key question. I figured this would come up. Can a Christian believe in Platonism? What do you think, Jim?
I guess. I mean, lots of depends what you mean questions there. I mean, we do sanitize Plato and Aristotle's status as Greeks in a lot of ways in the Christian tradition. Okay, so just using Aristotle as an example, like not everything that goes on in the Nicomachean Ethics is something that a Christian could really be into. Okay, I mean, there's
there's some cleanup duty that has.
There's some cleanup duty.
Yeah.
Okay, and you know, if we want to get into sexual issues, there'd be some cleanup duty in Plato. Okay.
Oh yeah.
But also, I think you can overestimate the degree to which Plato is trying to give you an applied ethics at all.
Yeah, yeah, right. And let's just draw a quick distinction. There's a difference between like getting the general structures or contours generally right, but then maybe being off on specific applications.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now, all that being said, I think, and I do like that the dry apologist has made he went with a small p Platonism there, not a capital P. Okay. And so in that way, I will say that I think Christians are small p Platonists.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I am.
Yeah. And certainly there's a perfectly good sense in which Aquinas is a Platonist. All right. I think there's a perfectly good sense in which the entire scholastic tradition is a Platonist. Okay. St. Augustine's a Platonist. So yes, definitely a Christian can be a Platonist. Right.
Where do you think the cleanup duty happens sort of metaphysically? So, I mean, kind of traditionally you have the form of the good, just, you know, is God himself, right? Yeah. That would be a big move. If somebody is committed independently. So a Christian, like on divine aseity, you're not going to want a bunch of abstract things just sort of hanging out in a Platonic heaven, right? You are going to want to do cleanup duty there. Yeah. And I think that's good because I think a sort of scholastic position is better, right? It makes better sense of the forms at the end of the day, right? So that's one thing. So in a sense, like that to me, that still is big tent Platonism. It's just it's just a it's more refined in a sense. It's more precise. Yeah. I don't know what else.
I mean, coming up with a God who gives a shit about us would be a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So
right.
I mean, so Aristotle. I mean, you know, the idea, and there's an interesting literature on this. You know, for Aristotle, the idea that God could be our friend is unthinkable.
Yeah, maybe friendly with the forms, but not friendly with God, right? Yeah. According to Aristotle.
Yeah, because you know, you would never. This is another thing from the Nicomachean Ethics. Like, you would never be a friend with someone who was not your equal. That would be a waste of your time. Okay, all right. Be very.
Are you hanging out with cockroaches, Jim?
Yeah, that would be very ungentlemanly, right? To do that.
Uncouth, yeah.
Uncouth, yeah. And so. For Aristotle, God would never be so uncouth as to look away from himself long enough to look to the world. Okay, so so the idea that the first move, the unmoving mover, right? That which all the universe runs on the universe's love for this thing. Okay, and this thing has no time period, but also no time but to love itself. Okay, the idea that thing would intervene in history to make it work out for these little cockroaches that run around on the mud ball in the middle of the universe is pretty unthinkable for the Greeks, right?
Yeah.
I mean, think of when St. Paul, you know, goes and talks to the philosophers in Athens in the New Testament, right? You know, he says, "Oh, you're unknown God you're talking about? You know, some of my friends met him and, you know, had dinner with him and someone killed him." They're like, "You know, come back when you want to talk."
Somebody killed him.
Yeah. You know what I mean? You know, like, you'll come back when you want to talk, you know, because you're just being silly or you're drunk. Don't they accuse him of drunkenness or something like that?
Yeah.
So, so, I mean, this idea of a God that intervenes in history, a God that's concerned and loves. Okay. But I mean, but this interesting point too is nobody really would have thought of that in the Greek speaking world, right? Until somebody like showed up and said, "No, I met him. He did it."
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
That's why, you know, John's prologues,
which is why the whole idea that this was just all stolen, right? It was all just stolen. Like, no, like you didn't really understand how the Greeks thought about this stuff. Yeah. If that's your hypothesis, right?
Like John's prologue is the most scandalous thing you could have in the Greek world, right? You know, like the logos, right? The thought of divinity, right? Literally, like dwelt, like pitched a tent. It became meat. I understand.
Put skin on.
Yeah. Became meat and pitched a tent with us, right? It's really carnal, right? That's just crazy talk to the Greeks. That's crazy talk.
Right. And that's the cool thing about St. Paul, right? He was such a chameleon. You know,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
apologist, like he met people where they were,
Yeah.
and he spoke their language. And he's, you know what he is? He's a generalist.
He's a generalist, short-term specialist.
Right.
And he was a good chameleon, not like Bob the Chameleon.
Yeah, not like a manipulative,
Not like a manipulative,
ball worshipping
Yeah.
fiend of hell like your pet chameleon. Definitely not
Exactly.
that, right?
Exactly. I'm serious about the Bob the Chameleon t-shirts, man. My son Brendan is designing already. So,
dude, I'm ready, man.
Yeah,
We'll put those on. We'll give some out. Let us know, gentle listeners, if you want a Bob the Chameleon t-shirt. Maybe we'll hook a few guys up for beta testers.
Yeah, exactly.
Against Fascists asked the same question. I think he realized that about Augustine being a Platonist. So good question, but it's been done with. Brian says, fun stuff. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that.
You, Brian.
Tim wants to know, is Aristotle's rejection of participation in metaphysics one more than a verbal disagreement? He continues, I think he rephrased his question. Is Aristotle's rejection of participation in metaphysics one more than a nominal disagreement, setting aside separate forms, ideas? What do you think of this, Jim?
I wouldn't be too fast to call it a rejection. Okay. I think it's pointing out that calling like coining a phrase like participation is not really to give an explanation. Okay. And that there is, and because Aristotle's going to go on all over the metaphysics to appeal to analogy, to do similar work here. And what do we mean by analogy, but kind of like participation, but what and so I don't see it as a rejection. I see it as it's pointing out that there is an extant problem, and don't hold your breath that this problem is going to be solved, right? In terms of how you relate the form to the individual. Okay. Oh, and by the way, I can show you in the Phaedo where Plato says the same thing. He says, call it a participation if you must, or call it something, but I don't even want to call it anything because it's confused. Okay.
Yeah.
So, once again, I know we could probably get texts out where Aristotle's super duper critical of it. Yes. Okay. But I think he's quite aware that he needs something like that relation to happen too. But he's just pointing out, probably to link, off the rails fundamentalist students of Plato's, to say, don't think that this solves the problem. Oh, and by the way, the boss knew it too, right?
Yeah, the boss.
Right. The old man. Yeah.
Yeah. Tim continues, does Neoplatonism faithfully represent Plato's actual teachings? And is letter 7 authentic?
Yeah, that goes over my historical pay grade. Yeah.
Yeah, same here. But good question.
Yeah,
worth thinking about. Yeah. All right, let's take one more. JW, this is more of a comment. He says, I'm currently reading Henry de Lubach's The Drama of Atheist Humanism and loving it. Have you read that one?
That's an excellent book. Yeah, it's a wonderful book.
Yeah, give us your summary thoughts on that.
So de Lubac has this interesting status in the church. He was a cardinal who got he was a Jesuit cardinal who got told to shut up, right, for a while, and then gets rehabilitated by John Paul II. So he's kind of you have to remember too, like the young Ratzinger and Karl Wojtyła and Henry de Lubac, and these were pretty crazy radical guys in their youth, right? It's just that we've come to see it their way in many ways. Okay. And so de Lubac wrote a book called The Drama of Atheistic Humanism, where he goes through he goes through Nietzsche and Marx and Auguste Comte and Dostoevsky, and it's a very, very good introduction to 19th century philosophy. Okay. And de Lubac is not like a manual Thomist, okay, and he's not unfair. I mean, I think his reading of Nietzsche is profound and very charitable, and I find it interesting that de Lubac reads Nietzsche almost entirely through Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, which I think is a brilliant way to approach it. Okay, his read on Dostoevsky is brilliant. Yeah, so I think if somebody wanted to get a start on 19th century European philosophy, I think that's a very good start.
Yeah, awesome. Well, hey, that's
one of my favorite books. Yeah,
that's another resource there for the gentle listeners. So once again, get the essential.
JW, you have chosen well.
Yeah, you've chosen super well, my friend. Get the Essential Plato. Get Gerson's work. Jim, remind us one more time of what you recommended.
What did I recommend? To get the CDC Reed's translation of The Republic from Hackett and read his introduction and then go at it, right? Or really any CDC Reed's, it's really brilliant. He's retranslated or is in the process of all of Aristotle's stuff for Hackett, and the introductions are just brilliant.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I'm going to link that stuff in the show notes over at Chronicles of Strength once we get the episode up there later this afternoon. So it'll be available presently. Gentle listeners, as always, if you like, we kick off these kind of new series as like, test cases. So if you like this, let us know. Give us your feedback. Let us know what thinkers you want us to put on the docket, what schools of thoughts. Yeah. And we'll do something similar. We'll open the conversation. We'll have fun with it. I guess I'll put those the summary, what is Platonism points over on the show notes as well. So yeah, rock and roll. Jim, anything else you want to mention before we close out here?
You properly use the word presently. And yes. That makes us part of a dying breed, my friend. Well done.
There's some hills you just have to be willing to die on.
Yeah, I will. Well, first of all, I'm going to keep the adverb alive, damn it. Okay. And presently and many versus fewer. Oh my gosh. I will admit I'm a complete dick about those two, but I'm all the way.
Some hills.
Some hills.
People like realize like you have to pick and choose your battles, but sometimes people forget that means you have to pick and choose at least some battles, right? Not that you just be a coward. So I appreciate your
man's got to have a line he won't cross.
Yeah, your bold manliness there. Gentle listeners, thank you so much. We're going to cue the music and peace to all of you.